I spoke to farmers from across the United Kingdom. Some of them families who farmed their land for centuries, elderly men in tears, children worried about their parents, all of them worried that their way of life is about to be destroyed.
No farmers! No farmers! No farmers!
What would the Right Honourable Lady like to say to them?
This will unleash seismic reforms, declares Angela Rayner about her new land acquisition policy. What she doesn't mention is whose homes will be shaking: Britain's farmers and rural landowners who now face having their property seized at agricultural rates rather than development values.
That's why we've committed £5 billion to the farming budget over the next 2 years. That's the largest ever amount for sustainable food production in the UK. Well, first of all, Mr. Speaker, we are absolutely committed to our British farmers, and that's why. It's alongside £60 million, Mr. Speaker, to support those affected by extreme wet weather, and over £200 million to tackle disease outbreaks.
The difference, often millions of pounds per acre. Tim Bonner from the Countryside Alliance calls it devastating for farmers already battling economic uncertainty. As rural communities mobilise against what they see as an existential threat, Rayner's team is scrambling to contain what's quickly becoming her biggest crisis since taking office. Before we move on, I'd like to ask you a small favour. If you appreciate this content, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch the videos without subscribing. It costs you nothing, but it makes a huge difference to us. So, did you click the subscribe button? Great, thank you so much. Now, back to the video. They're calling it removing barriers to development. But what Angela Rayner and Labour have actually engineered is nothing short of a rural land heist disguised as housing policy. The new Planning and Infrastructure Bill contains a provision that should send shivers down the spine of every British farmer and rural landowner. Let's be clear about what's happening here. Under this bill, local councils will gain extraordinary new powers to seize farmland through compulsory purchase orders, not at what the land could be worth once developed, but at its much lower agricultural value.
Farmers told me yesterday that they feel as though they have been betrayed by the Conservatives, but they now feel like they have also been lied to by Labour. Will the Deputy Prime Minister think again on this measure so that our farmers can feed Britain?
His party couldn't even get the money out the door for farmers, failing to spend over £300 million on farming budgets. The farmers know they ruined it for them, and that's why we're in government and they're not. Well, again, Mr. Speaker, I'm sorry to hear that Cathy is distressed by what I would say is scaremongering around what the Labour Party is doing.
This isn't just a technical change in planning law, it's a fundamental assault on property rights that specifically targets rural communities. The financial implications of this scheme are staggering. Imagine you're a farmer with land on the edge of a growing town. Yesterday, your land was worth £10 million on the open market because of its development potential. Today, under Rayner's new rules, the government can force you to sell it for just £1 million, a tenth of its true value. This isn't fair compensation. It's state-sanctioned theft of wealth from rural Britain. What makes this even more insidious is the creation of a two-tier system of property rights in Britain. If you own property in an urban area, you'll continue to enjoy full compensation at market value, should the government need your land. But if you're a farmer or rural landowner, you're suddenly a second-class citizen whose property can be seized at a massive discount. The message couldn't be clearer. Rural lives and livelihoods matter less than urban ones in Labour's Britain. This policy betrays a fundamental misunderstanding of what farming land represents. For most farmers, their land isn't just a commodity, it's their pension.
Our plan is sensible, fair and proportionate and protects the smaller estates while fixing public services that they rely on.
Alex Baker.
The budget delivered £5 billion for farming over the next 2 years, a record amount. The last government failed to spend £300 million on farmers.
Because farmers in Britain have been taken for granted for too long, and in the last few years in particular, so much has happened that farmers are no longer unable to afford to feed the British people.
Their inheritance for the next generation, and often the culmination of centuries of family stewardship. When the government strips away 90% of its value with the stroke of a pen, They're not just taking property, they're destroying family legacies and rural futures. The timing of this attack on farmers couldn't be worse. The agricultural sector is already facing unprecedented economic pressures from rising costs, weather extremes, and international competition. Adding to this perfect storm, farmers are currently bracing for significant inheritance tax changes set to take effect in April 2026. It's as if Labour looked at a community already on its knees and decided this was the perfect moment to deliver a knockout blow. Gavin Lane, Deputy Vice President of the Country Land and Business Association, summed up the situation perfectly. Pushing landowners into selling land isn't the answer. While acknowledging the need for more affordable housing, Lane rightly points out that this approach of targeting landowners is fundamentally flawed. The housing crisis isn't caused by farmers reluctant to sell land. It's caused by a planning system that moves at a glacial pace and developers who sit on land banks waiting for prices to rise. The implications of this policy extend far beyond just the financial hit to individual farmers. This represents a seismic shift in how property rights work in Britain. For centuries, a core principle has been that when the state takes your property for public use, it must pay fair market value. That principle is now being abandoned for one specific group of citizens. One has to wonder, if rural landowners can be targeted today, which group will be next? What Rayner and Labour are really doing here is revealing their true colours regarding rural Britain. Rather than working with farmers as partners in addressing the housing crisis, they've chosen to treat them as obstacles to be bulldozed. This betrays a metropolitan bias that sees the countryside as merely a land bank for urban expansion, rather than a living, working landscape with its own economic and cultural value. The compulsory purchase order changes fundamentally alter what it means to own property in Britain. No longer is your land truly yours if you are a farmer. It's effectively on loan from the state, which can reclaim it at a fraction of its value whenever politically convenient. This undermines the very foundation of a free market economy, the security of private property rights. What we're witnessing with Angela Rayner's land reforms isn't isolated policy. It's a troubling vision of Labour's Britain. When a government decides it can simply discount the true value of your property because it suits their agenda, no one's assets are truly secure. Today it's farmers and rural landowners. But who's next? Small business owners? Homeowners in areas targeted for regeneration? This pattern reveals Labour's true colours. Behind their flowery rhetoric about affordable housing and removing barriers lies a fundamental disrespect for property rights that form the backbone of our economy and society. The truly alarming question isn't just about compensation rates, it's whether we're seeing the first domino fall in a new era where the state decides what your property is worth based on political expedience rather than market reality. So next time you hear politicians talking about bold reforms or cutting red tape, remember to ask who's actually paying the price. Because when it comes to Rayner's planning revolution, it's clear the bill is being handed to Britain's farmers.